I'm Bob Cottrell, curator of the Conway Public Library's Henny History Room and the Conway Historical Society. And we are at the Hemlock Lane parking area for Redstone Quarry Trail. And here we have a kiosk that we're working on signage. We'll be adding photographs and informational text. On my left here are the rules for visiting the site. And I did want to point out that we're working on a cell phone tour as well. So you'll be able to use this and have maps and information, comparative photographs of what we'll be seeing then and now, and lots of information and links to other sites. It's a very well documented location, Redstone Quarry, here in Conway, New Hampshire. The first step is to cross the railroad tracks, and here we are at the tracks, and it's actually the railroad that led to the development of the Redstone Quarry. It was in the 1870s and 1880s when they were using just local granite to build the bridges which needed to cross the rivers and low areas, that a couple guys, George Wagg and Payson Tucker, found that the quality of the granite was so good that they wanted to expand the business. And so eventually they built a railroad spur and a siding into the granite quarry, which will be following the old tracks, which are now past. But this track is still used today for the Conway Scenic Railroad. And so now we're going to go to the next turn and go off into the woods. Here we are at one of the very many intersections that are on the trail system. The Redstone Trail that we're going to follow today is only a small part of a very extensive trail system that goes out throughout the mountains and is used multi-purpose for bicycles, hiking, kids with their strollers. We just saw some folks that had dogs walking through here. Now it's interesting to think about the history of the trails. This section here that we're looking at that's very straight and flat, this is actually part of that railroad siding that I was talking about. The rails have been pulled up. And then we're going to follow this curving trail that's designed for mountain bikings to give them an interesting experience with lots of twists and turns. And this will take us back into some of the other old roads that are back here. As you can see, when they're building the trails for the mountain biking, they put in a lot of elevation changes, a lot of jumps, a lot of activity you can do on this when you're biking. And you can see that goes off into one direction. Then over here, we have an example of some of the signage that the New England Mountain Bike Association has installed. And they have numbers that key to maps that you can reach on your cell phone or the internet. And then it has the names of the trail sections. So this is Pillar to Pond, and this one is Muffler Trail. And if you follow the Muffler Trail up, you can see that they've built a wooden decking to give some different variety and activity to the trail. And then over here they have an interesting jump and turn and twist. Now we're getting back to the Redstone Quarry, and we're going to be walking towards one of the most interesting features that you'll find in the quarry, and that is this granite pilaster that's off to the side of the trail. So here we have a green granite, very highly polished, and it's actually a pilaster. Some people think of it as a column, but you can see that the back of it is actually flat. So it's designed to be built right up to the side of a building. And this has turned on a lathe, and we're going to see some of the machinery that it was used to make this. And you still see the tool marks here where the points of the lathe would be pushed against this to hold it tight as this spun very, very fast, and very sharp tools were used to sharpen, to shape, and to polish this granite pilaster. And here we are at the remains of the boiler room, and here you can see the two boilers that were heated to produce steam, and the steam was used to operate these steam engines over here and to run a lot of the equipment that powered the tools that created the granite shapes and columns and pilasters and other types of things. So this is an example of one of the steam engines, and you can see it was made by the Chicago Pneumatic Tool Company out of Chicago, Illinois. And here is the governor, it even says Governor 4, that would control the speed of the flywheels and the belting. And here's an example of one of the large flywheels that would use to create the pressure to power the tools. And as you can see, there were 2 large steam engines that were used to power all the equipment in the quarry and the shed areas, and we'll be going down there to see the what's remains of the equipment. What you're looking at here is the remains of the stone shed, and it was in here that a lot of the fine carving was done. This was a very large building. Behind me you can see part of the remains of the foundation. And this machine here was a conveyor belt that would run constantly, and there'd be a number of blacksmiths here, and they would use this to sharpen the tools because they were using a lot of metal tipped tools that had to be sharpened over and over and over again. So this was constantly running while the operation was going on. This is the post that leads you to the lathe house on the Rattlesnake Trail, number 42. But I wanted to point out these stones that are here at my feet. This one here that I'm touching with my foot is green granite, and this one is red granite. You can see there's a subtle difference in color, and this is very high quality stone, and the color held a very high polish. So that's what made this granite so valuable. And here outside the lathe house is remains of one of the many derricks that were connected by wires that were strung overhead. And you can see here, this is sort of like a cup, and this is kind of like an elbow that would fit together, and the booms and would move around, and there'd be different pulleys and winches. You could pick up rough stone, such as you see in the background, have it cut into different dimensions. And now we're going to look at the lathe house, the lathe itself. So here we are at the big roughing out lathe that would take the rectangular pieces of granite, and they would be held by those 2 points there and controlled. The cutting heads would be controlled by these different steering wheels. The whole thing could move back and forth and up and down, and this would give you a rough column. And all of this operation was run off of leather belts that were connected to these various size wheels, and by moving them from one wheel to the next, you could change the speed and the power of the lathe. Now here we are at the smaller finishing polishing lathe, and once it had been roughed out, the column or the pilaster would be spun to a glassy finish on this lathe here. You can see the big wheel and the points which would connect it and catch it together. You can see it hasn't been used in a while because there's a tree growing up in the middle of the lathe. And this machine was made by the Betts Machine Company, Wilmington, Delaware. It's interesting to me that we have equipment from all over the country. We looked at the Chicago Pneumatic Tool Company. We're looking at the lathe manufacturing out of Wilmington, Delaware. A lot of the derricks were made in St. Paul, Minnesota, and the wood from the derricks actually came from the Pacific Northwest. So we have the whole country coming together here in Conway, New Hampshire. And then what's interesting is these columns and these pieces that were manufactured were put into buildings such as Grant's Tomb in New York City, South America, California, Ohio State House. So the work from here went all around the country, and in fact some of it all around the world. Running to and from the lathe house and the yard with the derrick is a train line, and we're going to follow this up the hill to the quarry where the stone was cut from the raw mountainside. You can see along the track here remains of Conway's industrial history. Here's an axle with a pair of wheels leaning up against a tree here, some of the rail line, and here another set of wheels and an axle. And now we're going to continue heading up the trail to the quarry. Here we are at the base of a waste pile. So as they were cutting the good granite out of the quarry, which we'll see in a moment, anything that was deemed not valuable enough to work with and to sell, they would just pile off to the side on either way. This trail is going to lead us right up between the tailings or the waste piles to the quarry. But it's interesting to see all these pieces that were just left. Here we are at the quarry itself, and you can see a couple remains of a couple derricks that were here. And you can see they were quite tall, with guy wires coming out from every angle to hold them straight up and down and to control the maneuvering of the stone. And this one's interesting because the water is actually kind of low today, and you can see the remains are part of the bull wheel that was used to spin or steer the derrick around. And if you look over here on this other side, the second derrick, you can see the bull wheel leaning up against the stone that it was positioned on top of. And then leading the guy wires, we're next going to go over to the engine house that operated these derricks. So here you can see some more information about the machinery that was used here by the DeVerg refrigerating company out of New York. And this would power these various gears connected to the engine house. And there's a large number of wheels and connections and pitman arches, arms, and this again was what was operating the derricks and the operation here. Next, we're going to go down just a short distance along a track that was run to drop off the excess waste and the rocks, and has a beautiful view. So we've come out along the old rail line that would be extended on top of the tailings or the waste pile, and you can see the waste on either side of this rail, and the rail would have continued going from where I am here, and had they done it for another 100 years, they would have gone out 200, 300, 400 more feet. If they'd done it for 1,000 years, they would have reached all the way over to Moat Mountain. And over here you can see Birch Hill, Shakorowa, the Three Sisters, the moats, and I can actually see the White Mountain Hotel over here to the very right. And then down over here, you can see we're about 60 or 70 feet up high. So all below us is just big giant piles of waste material that didn't meet the criteria to become sellable and commercially viable stone. Now we're going to go back down the trail and into the town, which was built by the company. They built the store, they built boarding houses, they built all the houses that we'll see, the school, and the church was actually built by a private individual. But we'll see where the people lived that worked this whole quarry for over 100 and so years. So here we are at the end of the trail, and we're following the remnants of an asphalt paved road on which over 500 men would go to work every day from the village that's on the other side of that fence. So here we are in front of the Redstone School. The children of all the workers and their families would go to school here in a 2-room schoolhouse, and you can see at the top of the building is a steam whistle which would call the kids to school and let people know when school is over. Now we're going to follow down the main street of the town and look at some of the buildings, the houses. They're all built in the same style for the workers. So here you can see along Redstone Street, which is one of the 3 cross streets in town, that all of the buildings are basically built in the same format, the same footprint and the same height and size. And what they've done is people have since adapted their houses, adding a porch here, enclosed porch, adding a cupola or something like that. But basically you can see they're all originally the same. Now we're across the street from the intersection of Mountain and Redstone Street, and behind me was the original site of the train depot and the freight house. And now we're going to walk and see the pair of train tracks that are still in existence. So here we are where we can see the main line of the railroad tracks that went from Portland to Ogdensburg. And then next to that was a siding which has just been covered over with asphalt. But here you can see the trail, the tracks, and trees have grown up in the middle of it. But this is where the cars would be set off to the side so as not to stop the main traffic, and they would be loaded with stone and shipped out. So here we are at the sundial, which serves as a World War I memorial at the corner of Eastman Road and Mountain Street. And across the street is the remains of the store building. It was the company store, and you could use credit from the company to buy goods and flour and salt and bacon and stuff like that. Now, this sundial was carved out of the stone on the lathe that we looked at, actually from the mountainside that we see here. And this is the Veterans of the World War, 1917 and 1919. And it has cast in bronze the names of the boys from Redstone who served in World War I. These stones here, this one is Redstone, and it's actually carved in Redstone. You can see a picture of the stone house, the stoneworking shed, and it has some nice information. And on the other side, we have a sign with some history, a chronology of Redstone from 1871 actually up till 2011. And it has the different years that key events happen. And here you can see a logo or an impression of a engine house with the derricks. This is another example of carved granite done on the lathe. You can see the lathe tool marks here. Now you're familiar with those. Carved from the very mountain that's behind us here. Welcome to Redstone Village. And we're just a short 5-minute walk back to our cars. And if you're more interested in more information, contact me, Bob Cottrell, curator, Conway Public Library. The number is 447-5552. That's Conway Public Library. You can email us or just drop by. Love to show you around the history room and the Conway Historical Society, where we have lots of photographs, some of the original lists of people who worked here, what they were paid. We have bills showing where the stone was sent and how much it costs over the years. So please come and visit us at the Conway Public Library and the Conway Historical Society.